Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for choosing Across the Fence. I'm Will Michael. One of the central features of our program is the conversations we have with our guests on a daily basis. What makes today's conversation unique is that it's about the UVM Conversation Lab. The Conversation Lab is part of the UVM Larner College of Medicine. It focuses on understanding and promoting high-quality communication among those touched by serious illness. It is in life-threatening circumstances that some of the most important and some of the most difficult conversations in healthcare take place. The UVM Conversation Lab is led by Dr. Robert Gramling. He's a professor of family medicine and the Holly and Bob Miller Chair in Palliative Care at the Larner College of Medicine. And alongside Dr. Gramling is Nina Pastori. Nina is a research assistant in the lab, and she's just completed a project that we're going to learn more about today. I want to welcome both of you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
Dr. Gramling, I'm going to start with you. What is the purpose of the Vermont Conversation Lab?
You introduced it beautifully, Will. The idea, the central idea, is that we have not tended well in the last probably 50, 60 years in healthcare to conversations, to how we interact with people, particularly in the vulnerable places that people find themselves in the hospital and elsewhere. And we seek to create a world where people feel heard and understood, where they feel connection with those around them, and particularly the idea of conversation, how we interact in communication, how we make meaning and how we find it.
Very important, because as you're pointing out, as a culture, we don't do very well with talking about life and death situations. So there's research that, and we're going to spend a bulk of our time today talking about the research. So what kind of research is involved at the Conversation Lab? What's it focused on?
So as you pointed to, it's the idea of human connection, the idea of feeling heard and understood. And we have a few different themes that we focus on. And one is, how do we analyze conversations? If we're going to try to improve what we do, measuring it is important. Measuring how people experience communication and actually what happens. And one of the things, I'm trained as an epidemiologist, I'm used to studying things and observing them, is we try to understand how people communicate meaningfully with one another. What are the things that happen? How do we know it's happening? And so measurement becomes a big focus of what we do. Another focus is, how do we scale conversations? How do we make the public health problem of loneliness, how do we create a world where people can have meaningful conversations whenever they need or find them? And so it's both having an understanding that is really where I think get our energy as a group that we're working on.
I'm connecting the idea of the first question that I asked about the purpose and understanding. I think we all have an understanding that these topics of life and death in our culture are difficult. So you've just shared with us that we're engaged in these conversations. How do you involve people? How do you make that happen? Or is that the bad choice of words, making it happen?
So in a research setting, as a scientist, one of the things we invite people to participate and say, we'd like to understand what good communication looks like. Would you like to participate in a study? So we understand when you're communicating with people that we can learn what is good from your perspective. And so we, as participants in studies, are always asked what was helpful, what was not helpful about that interaction. And we try to study what we can observe to point to what were some of the things that might be happening that we want to do more of, and what are some of the things that we probably could do less of or do differently. And that's a little bit of what we focus on.
Your website lays out ways in which you are engaged and you're doing research, and one of the places I want to spend some time on today is studying storytelling and story listening. We learned a long time ago we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We're supposed to do twice as much listening. I don't know that we're all very good at that. So what got you interested? What does it tell you to be engaged in storytelling and story listening? And are they the same thing?
I think me, as a human, I enjoy hearing little bits about people's lives. And as a physician, the idea of, the idea of suffering, if we think of suffering as that which threatens who I am as a person, there's no medical device that can measure who Bob is. The only way I can know that is if Will and Nina, and if you want to hear how I make sense of life and my experiences. And stories is a near culturally ubiquitous way in which we do that. Is, geez, this happened to me, and here's how I'm thinking about it. And so as a physician, those little nuggets of, sometimes they're profound in a way we can always see, sometimes they're smaller moments that are meaningful in people's lives, and they unfold as stories. And so I've been interested in that as a clinician for a while.
Very interesting. The key, given your interest, is then techniques to how to make that happen. And we can come back to that with you, but maybe that's a good time to bring Nina into our conversation, because you've just completed, as I understand, this story listening study or story listening intervention study. So tell us a little bit about what that is.
Yes, so again, thank you for having me here.
Absolutely.
As an undergraduate, I was very lucky to be invited to take part in the lab and to assist with the research project. It was actually the lab who designed the story listening study, and within that I was able to complete my own research project. For me, I wanted to focus on how we communicate empathy, and that led me to the concepts of emotional intelligence and active listening, and that's really something that I got to dive into with my fellow students and also the faculty and staff of the lab.
Did you learn, I'm sure you learned something about yourself. What did you learn in terms of how active listening helped you learn? What did it do for you?
That's a great question. I think it made me think more about being intentional when I listen to people. I think a lot of what active listening is really just intentionality, choosing to sit down with a person and provide them with the space and the time to show that you have empathy for what they're saying and what it is that they are communicating to you. I think especially in healthcare settings, which is where we work, it can be really emotional, really heavy, and it can get messy. So being there for anything that comes up, that's really what's important.
You referenced undergraduate, and visiting with you before the program, I learned that you were in the Leahy's Honors College as an undergraduate. This was during COVID, and you took a class that kind of introduced you to this whole idea of, I wrote down conversation analysis. I don't know if that's accurate. What was that? Where did it take you? This, again, during a time of COVID, and you're trying to figure out how to converse with people. Boy, that's a challenge, huh?
It was challenging. I think coming back to conversations was difficult because for so long we were all so secluded. But something that I definitely felt like I got from that class was this value of storytelling. Storytelling is something that we as human beings have been doing since the dawn of time. And to take storytelling into this kind of therapeutic realm, because storytelling is therapeutic, I think that that's a really interesting concept.
So is there something that you learned, and I know there is, that you could share with our audience to make us better as active listeners, to better understand someone's story? A tip, if you will?
Sure, absolutely. I think part of active listening that we already do in our conversations is providing feedback. So oftentimes when somebody's telling you a story, you might say small words or small phrases that show that you're validating what they're saying, that you're hearing them and you're following. But usually after the story is over, you kind of have a space and a time to reflect on it. So I think being intentional with what you say as you paraphrase or reflect on what you've heard, that can be a good time to show somebody that you've really been listening.
Bob, these conversations about life and death, and again, this is part of your website and your study, your palliative work. I know that you understand this is some pretty heavy stuff. Not everybody's prepared to do that. I know that there's teaching and education and training. Are some people cut out for it and others aren't? Are we all capable of these empathetic and listening conversations?
And I go out on a limb and I'll say yes, Will. I mean, I think we are empathic beings. I think the idea of connecting with others is kind of baked into us in different ways. It manifests differently for people. But yes, and when you talk about are we cut out for it, we're all going to be ill. We're all going to get sick, and we're all going to die someday. And we're all going to feel lonely. We're all going to feel joy. And having a place to share that can be a beautiful thing.
So these shared experiences, when we can speak and listen with intentionality, I can sort of just coming together, you can sort of feel the power of that. It's we have just a couple of minutes left. Bob, you're beginning some work on, again, from the website, immersive story listening for healthcare workers and students. Help us understand what immersive story listening with students looks like.
Fantastic. Yeah, so we're going after the idea of, have you ever heard of the concept of forest bathing? The idea of putting yourself in an environment where you feel wonder and you feel awe. Immersive story listening is based on the idea, can we find wonder and awe in listening to everyday stories? And so a big shout out to two students, Isabel and Luke, who are working in our lab this summer to curate StoryCorps stories, actually, to put into these listening experiences for healthcare people is under the idea, gosh, can we create a listening experience where healthcare people who are emotionally and existentially exhausted, where they can bear witness to these magical everyday stories, find awe and wonder, and does that buoy us? Does it bring us into a space where we feel more meaning in our work and feel less lonely in doing it with people? And so it's really pretty cool to see what they're coming up with.
Well, it is cool. It's been great to visit with both of you. I'm going to stop us there as we're just about out of time, but ask you to keep us in mind and come back and share more. There is much more richness with the Conversation Lab. You can find more information about the Vermont Conversation Lab by checking the website that we put on the screen, the VermontConversationLab.com, part of the UVM Larner College of Medicine. Again, Bob and Nina, thank you very much for being with us. That is our program for today. We know you have choices, so thanks for choosing us. I'm Will Michael, inviting you to join us back here each weekday afternoon for another visit across the fence.